I feel like I'm judging myself too hard today. Everybody put your hands together for Christian J. Watson! Boom! All right. Christian,
Hi.
welcome. I promise we're going to have a real conversation today, and it's not going to be just me doing weird things while you sit there and
You know,
watch.
you know that song. I heard the whole thing. Reminded me of like some '80s disco stuff.
Yeah.
Was that what you were going for?
Yes, actually it is. It is. It's exactly
Oh,
what I'm going
okay.
for. It's actually kind of a parody of someone help me out here. Cruel Summer by Oingo
Okay.
or Bananarama. So it's
Okay.
Cruel Summer. So I can't.
Okay.
And
Well,
he's like,
I guess
all
disco
right.
is alive, isn't it? It's
It
quite
is
alive,
actually.
isn't it?
And it is actually the whole so like that's like synth pop 80s type stuff, and that
Yeah,
has actually come back. And when you look at shows like Stranger Things, I don't know if you watch Stranger Things, but there's
I've
some.
heard of it. No, not really.
Yeah, well, it's a show on Netflix, but the show has like that 80s synth wavy type music to it, and it
Hmm.
really started a big push. And I mean, it's not everywhere, but like The Weeknd is like the best example of like it reaching the pop level again. Oh, with The Weeknd's last album, it's very much it has those old school synthesizers, has those old sounds and stuff, and I think The Weeknd killed it, so I don't know. This is a music podcast, so I did want to start with a softball here, and like you were saying something about music at the beginning, and you're married to actually, yeah, I know, yeah, she knows, Robbie, she knows, but yeah, the you were saying something at the beginning of music, and I was just curious: is there a particular genre, or is there a particular type of music that you gravitate to? I imagine classical, but
Why do you imagine classical?
just because it's the opening for your show is classical, and you're smart, and smart people listen to classical music. Me,
Really?
I don't listen to classical. No, I do actually listen to classical. I love classical music. I love jazz and stuff like that. But I'm curious of you. I'm just assuming shit right now. So please fill us in. Where do you
Well,
live?
so I would be I would be remiss if I didn't say that some of the most hauntingly beautiful music that I have heard has come from the classical genre.
Yes, absolutely.
Listening to Bach
Mm.
most of the time, if I had hair, it'd be standing up. I don't have hair though, so again, it really doesn't really stand up. But do I listen to that regularly? No. When I was much younger, I'm 21 right now.
Mm,
So when I was like 14, 13, maybe I listened to that a little bit more.
mm.
But even then, I like have words with my music. So I first of all, I love music. I think music is wonderful. Formerly, I used to be solely a classic rock guy. I used to be a guy who would only listen to Billy Joe, Rod Stewart, Neil Young,
Yeah.
Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, Cream, Eric Clapton, Elton John. I had a huge thing for Elton
ZZ
John,
Top?
actually.
Did you like
I
ZZ
had
Top?
a, I haven't listened. I
Oh
haven't
man,
listened.
you're missing out, my friend.
I
You're missing
but
out.
I had a huge thing for Elton John
Mm.
actually. When I was 14, I actually had a shirt with Elton John, Captain Fantastic, the cover from that album on there.
Yeah.
I had a huge thing for Elton John. I listened to almost all of his albums. Actually, not almost. I have listened to all of his albums. I used to have a thing for like live recordings, so I would listen to most of his concerts as well
Oh
from
yeah.
particular eras. I had a huge thing for him. Now, the detriment to that was I basically only listened to Elton John music. My phone used to have only Elton John performances and songs on them, so I never really got exposed to other people.
Got
But
it.
as I kept getting exposed to other people, my interest shifted and changed. I also really have a thing for R&B, which is probably not surprising, but I like R&B a lot, particularly 90s R&B. I
Mm.
think all that stuff is great as well. And I like some, I like music that folks would probably consider not to be very thoughtful or pensive, but a little bit more risque.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm not sure how familiar you are with 90s R&B, but
I'm pretty
I
familiar.
really like 90s R&B.
Uh,
I also
I actually had
like
Melvin Riley on the show from Melvin Riley. Oh Sheila, Dun, 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 dun. Oh my God, what's the name? Ready for the World. Ready for the World. I have Melvin on it.
Okay.
He's
Oh, see,
amazing.
okay, awesome.
No,
Yeah. So I like,
I absolutely love that stuff. And
yeah, I like nice.
I have an affinity for that type of music. I mean, like We Speak English Good is also a music. I do that under a music name as well, but it's
Yeah.
WSEG, and it's all planning to be like that synthy type of pop stuff. And I actually do want to create an entire like '90s or late '80s, like SWV type of
Oh,
album as well.
SWV is wonderful.
Yes, absolutely.
SWV, on Vogue, Escape,
Oh,
all of them.
yes.
Jodeci, Jagged Edge, every single one of them. Bobby Brown, Keith Sweat. I
Hey,
mean, all that kind of stuff really gets. I mean, I shouldn't be listening to some of that stuff, but
you
it
what?
really.
But why, Christian? Why shouldn't you be listening to
Well,
that?
okay. Some of those artists, all they're talking about is one thing. We know what that one thing is, and
Hey,
hearing,
hey, it makes the world
and
go
hearing
round,
that.
man.
It does. But yeah, so all that stuff, I like all that stuff.
Mm.
So I'm listening to more of that. I also like some contemporary jazz.
Mm.
So Harry Connick Jr., I'm a fan of his. Although I think he's gone off the rails recently. I mean, he released a Pandemic album where he did a performance where he was playing all the instruments on the stage by himself. He was like running around the stage and like playing everything. I'm
Yeah.
like, are you all right, man? Is everything okay? Is everything all right, dude? I mean, I understand COVID and everything, but where's your band, man? You're just like running on the stage, you're
Yes.
panting, blowing into the trumpets, playing the piano, and like all the judges on American Idol are just sitting there clapping their hands. I'm like, no,
So
come on,
brave,
Jesus.
so brave.
And yeah, I have a thing for 80s power ballads as well.
Ooh,
So
yes.
people like Bonnie Tyler. There was this man who used to do them as well. I forgot what his name was, but I liked him as well. There's and she's not really a power ballad person. She's more of a rock person. But Pat Benatar,
Oh
I have a
yeah.
thing for her as well. I think that she's awesome. Um, yeah, and yeah. So and Michael Bublé, who was more in the jazz,
Mm,
contemporary pop jazz, I like him as well.
yeah.
So yeah, my interests are everywhere, quite
Yeah.
literally everywhere. There are a few kind of music types of music that I will just not listen to though. I will not listen to trap. I can't stand it. I can't stand
Fair
it.
enough.
I
Fair
can't
enough.
stand Yo Gotti and Lil Pump and
Whoa.
all these Lils
What
and
about?
Nas's
Wait,
and
wait, wait. Hold on though. What about the baby? Have you heard about
I can't
the?
stand the baby. I
Have
can't
you?
stand that.
Did you hear what
Oh,
happened with him? I,
yeah. Oh, yeah. I heard about that. About the gay thing, and
mm,
before that, there was a preceding controversy about how apparently he wasn't being nice to a few kids who were trying to sell him something.
mm,
So yeah, I know about the baby. I don't really look. Both of those things don't really. I couldn't care less, but. What is that one song he talks about destroying people's mail? Suge, yeah, Suge. We're talking about he's destroying people's mail and stuff,
mm.
committing, theft. Look, I'm just not really into all that
Yeah,
stuff.
of
But a
course. I
lot
mean,
of folks my age go to the club and they pump it up to that kind of stuff.
yeah, yeah.
And so that's their thing, but
No,
not my thing.
well, that's fine,
No,
right? Like
no, sir.
that's like it's no one can be mad at you for not liking the baby,
I like some hip hop.
except for behind that
I
suit
think
says that you should like the. He said that's slanderous that you don't like the baby.
Man, I don't know how much I could. Anyway, I like some hip hop though.
Mm,
So
yeah.
I think even though I think Suge Knight, let me try not to get whacked here. I don't know. I have nothing against Suge Knight. I don't want to get whacked. Don't whack me, please. I don't want to get whacked because he has a tendency to do that. Even though Suge Knight has some questionable past activities,
Hmm.
I think a lot of things that came out of Death Row Records were pretty good.
Absolutely.
Just being honest. I
Absolutely.
think that NWA, I think they had something with Death Row Records for a while. I think they're pretty good. Ice T,
Yeah.
I think Ice T, New Jack Hustler. I mean, when I like the kind of music that tells a story,
Yeah.
not a story that is romanticized and glamorized and unrealistic.
Hmm.
When Ice T's talking about being a New Jack Hustler, he's talking about the kind of principles and values that he had to embody in his neighborhood. And he's asserting that part of himself into who he is. And even if you disagree with those principles and values, it's an honest account of his life. So, I mean, I think that a lot of these musicians, the old school hip hop, had something to say.
Yeah.
You know, Tupac talking about Jenny has a baby, talking about the crisis of inner city youth having kids before they're ready. That's something you have to say. You know, CeeLo Green. I still admire and love CeeLo Green, but you know, he used to be with the Gooby Mob, and when he went solo, he made a record called CeeLo Green's Wonderful Something Something. I forgot what it was called. I think it's his first solo album ever made, and he rapped in that, and that was wonderful. He had a lot of things to say.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was basically an album about, you know, individualism, asserting yourself, understanding who you are. So yeah, there are some hip hop people that I can really get into.
Yeah.
Then there are others who I'm like, how in the world? Well, again, I guess my guilty pleasure. I guess, I mean, I'm not sure. You probably have heard of her, but there's this lady called Cupcake. I'm
Cupcake.
not sure if you've heard.
I
Yeah,
have
yeah.
not. I
This
have not.
rapper called Cupcake.
I bet
I
behind that
think
Sue has heard of him.
I think she's great.
What she
uh,
do? Like what?
she's more, she's rap. She's not trap, but she's rapping. She you know, she has some risque songs.
Ah.
Well, so she started off with some very risque, overly sexual songs,
Okay.
but then she moved on to more serious stuff. She moved on to more serious stuff, talking about a lot of social issues. But you know, when she began, she was, you know, doing stuff on camera that was questionable.
Hmm.
Probably she was making overtly sexual songs for clicks. But she
Gotcha.
kind of reeled in, yeah, and that's her right there. She kind of reeled in an audience that cared about what she had to say.
Oh, that's cool.
So I like her. I think that she's great. We don't agree politically always, but that's fine. But I think that she's great. She has some great songs like Scraps and cartoons and just some good stuff that is high quality rhythm and flow. So yeah, I point is there are some hip hop people that I can handle, and
Hmm.
others where I'm just like, who gave you a budget for the music video? Who gave you an advance for this album? You know, what? I mean, and here's the thing though, a lot of these rappers
Hmm.
tend to allow a lot of younger suburban kids to get involved in this fantasy, right?
Hmm.
So when Yo Gotti is talking about how he tells all of his, you know what, to break it up, a lot of these young suburban kids are like doing all these gang symbols with their hands
Hmm.
and like pretending as if they also have a group of women who are scantily clad and dressed that they can also get into rake it up. I mean, it's a fantasy. Rap
Hmm.
music is a big fantasy a lot of times, and
Yeah.
that's the problem with modern day rap music, in my opinion. And this is actually a point that CeeLo Green made when he first began his solo career back in 2005, 2006. But he kind of, I mean, CeeLo Green was in the video for Yo Gotti's song "It Goes Down the DMs,"
Hmm.
so he kind of lost respect from me because if you're gonna criticize rappers for talking about superfluous shit, excuse
Yeah.
my language, and then you're
No,
gonna go
you're
ahead
good.
and you're gonna be involved. I mean, I don't know. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's my review of music as a whole. If you have any questions along that regard, please ask them.
Well, no, I'm interested because like you mentioned NWA and Ice-T, and
Mm,
these artists were, they were attempted to be canceled back in the '90s by Tipper
hmm.
Gore, and they were
Yep. Oh
strutted out in
yeah.
front of Congress and stuff, and they were just speaking truth to power, speaking truth to their lives and stuff, and I don't know, there's a lot of people now who are getting canceled for speaking to power, telling their truths,
Yep.
and they're being canceled. You know, what do you think about cancel culture and how it's sort of taken such a prevalent place in the world, and especially with artists, which I am so against. Well, I will just refrain from giving you my opinion. I'd rather hear yours. So, what do you think about it, especially in the art, in the expression side of it?
So cancel culture has been around since the dawn of civilization.
Hmm.
For as long as there have been social groups or individuals within social groups, because really individuals are the core of social groups. Groups themselves do not have a consciousness. Individuals have consciousness. So for as long as there have been individuals and social groups with contrary values, there has been a desire to force those values onto other people or to make those values dominant vis-a-vis force. So we can see this even, let's go into more colonial history.
Sure.
What happened when someone displeased the general sense of the village? If the village didn't like someone, or someone did something that was morally abominable to the people in the village, well, you could just be exiled from the village. You go out to the wilderness, you have nowhere to go. You become food for the bears, and you could become a sort of slave to circumstance.
Yeah.
As well. And so exile used to be, death. Now you get exiled today, plenty of people get exiled today, and they're just fine. But
Right.
back then,
Yeah.
when you had self-contained villages, were self-contained units,
Right.
and a lot of the resources that you would get in your life, a lot of sustenance you would get in life required the community.
Yeah.
You go away, you die. More contemporarily, or actually, let's go back to the ancients as well. Socrates, I think one of the most prescient philosophical voices, probably one of the most influential philosophers in the Western canon, primarily due to his Socratic dialogue, his sort of challenging of established beliefs, which has come to define a lot of contemporary philosophy.
Yeah.
He was counseled for making people
Yeah.
question the established norms of the Athenian. The Athenians believed in gods and everything, and they believed in certain norms. Socrates called all of them into question. You had the folk singers, and by the way, I like folk music as well. Folk music is wonderful. 1960s American revival folk music, particularly.
Absolutely.
So we have Woody Guthrie, you have Bob Dylan, you have Pete Seeger, you have Peter, Paul, and Mary, you have
Joni Mitchell.
Joni Mitchell. You have a man who just passed. His name is blanking on me, but he just passed, and he wrote a song called "Your Flag Decal Will Not Get You Into Heaven Anymore." John Prine.
Yeah.
You had John Prine. You had all these brilliant visionaries. Again, and Phil Oakes, can't forget Phil Oakes. Cannot forget Bob Dylan either. You have all these brilliant visionaries, many of whom were very, not my cup of tea politically, but they still were speaking their values and their opinions. In some instances, they were right. Many of them spoke about censorship and everything like that. Many of them were dragged towards Nixon and McCarthy's tribunals, the House Un-American Affairs Committee, and they were accused of being communists. That's cancel culture. Yeah, so we have cancel culture in or the obscenity laws of the 90s, which brought a lot of rap groups before courts. Right. That's also cancel culture. Jack Thompson, this crazy ultra right-wing attorney who wanted to sue video game companies for making violent video games, that was cancel culture as well. Cancel culture has always existed. It always will exist. Now, the problem with our modern iteration of cancel culture is that it has become more widely effective with the advent of the digital age, right? So with the internet around and with the ability to transcend time and space, with the click of a button, the effects of cancel culture can be felt more clearly. If you're back in the 1950s, where they have a bunch of people who are being called communists being drugged before congressional committees, then if you're in the middle of Nebraska and you don't have there was no internet back then, you really didn't follow politics, it didn't affect you. But now if you're in the middle of Nebraska and you work for a corporation and there's this woke group trying to get that corporation to institute certain speech or thought policies, it affects you now. Yeah. So things are more widely dispersed with the advent of the internet. That's why I think cancel culture has been number one, labeled in that with that colloquial term, and number two, talked about so much. But it's not really any more prevalent than it was in the 50s, 60s, 70s. That's not to say that it's not a big deal. It is a big deal. It's a huge deal. Right. It needs to be fought. But it's not a new thing. Right. It's an ancient thing, which unfortunately has a new face, right? Yeah. What did Billy Idol say? Eyes without a face, right? Well, that's kind of how I feel about this, right? The face that had no eyes, according to Billy Idol, now has eyes. It has a mouth, has everything. It has all the features that were alien to it, and those features are making us say, "Whoa, the face had no eyes. Yeah. What's going on here?" Yeah.
So then, like. I understand that this is something that's been prevalent for a long time, but like you said, that the with the advent of technology and the internet and how reliable that these things are, how much it's being relied upon, do you think that with social media, especially with big tech collusion, especially colluding with our government, colluding with mainstream media and stuff, do you think that this is this is something that I know you said we should fight it, but do you think that it's kind of getting out of control in a way that is not reversible?
No, it's reversible, all right. I think it's reversible.
Mhm.
The problem is when things become fashions, they're a little bit harder to beat back. But the problem is most Americans, as far as I understand, don't buy into cancel culture. Most Americans do not buy into censorious speech. Let's not forget, America is still a right-leaning country.
Mhm.
It is still a country with individuals who believe in our bedrock principles of life and liberty and property and natural rights. Most people still believe in these things. Now, a lot of those people are kind of neglected for the urbanites who reside on both the coasts. And hey, I'm not attacking the urbanites. I am myself an urbanite. I like urban areas. Think that their amenities are pretty damn nice. I can't stand rural areas, but I understand that most people in urban areas tend to be, I mean, stat wise, tend to be more left leaning. And so that those part of the country, also they tend to have a more higher population distribution in those areas of the country than the Midwest.
Mhm.
So those part of the countries are able to voice their opinions a little bit louder than folks who are in Middle America, who are lovingly called flyover country. So I think that's what you're seeing. You're seeing a lot of people in those quarters of the country embrace woke philosophy, then use that woke philosophy in their everyday life, whether it's particularly in institutions. But we have again, this has been going on for a very long time. I mean, as far back as the 90s, I mean, there was a debate on William F. Buckley, who was my opinion, one of the most brilliant political commentators to ever grace America. There was a debate on firing line talking about speech codes on campuses. And there were people from the left and the right debating on if there should be speech codes on campuses. And there was this one professor back in the 90s that said, yes, speech can be violence, and that should be taken seriously, and it should require legislation to protect marginalized people who may not have had the force or the resources to fight back against such violence. And this is an idea espoused by critical race theorist Mary Matsuda in a book that she did alongside Kimberly Crenshaw, Richard Delgado, and John Stefanik, who were also all her fellow travelers in the critical race theory sphere, called Words That Wound. And there is also a paper she did back in the 90s called A Response to the First Amendment, or an examination of the First Amendment, where she says, yes, there are some people in America, Black individuals, who have not had the power to fight back against these sort of aggressive types of speech. And if we can ascertain that these aggressive types of speech have actually impacted them mentally, we can therefore say there's an aggression being committed here, that law, if it is properly and critically understood, not as it is traditionally understood, as it is critically understood, can make an impact to protect them. So this is an idea that simply is getting more steam because ideas can be more easily dispersed. I forgot who it was. I blank on my philosophical references all the time. Oh no, it was Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass actually said in a speech called "What is the 4th of July to the Negro?" He said that he has hope for America because as time persists, the avenues by which, and I'm paraphrasing here, the avenues by which we transmit ideas will be broader. Well, Frederick Douglass could never have imagined in a world where the airways were not accessible to us through any technological device, in a world where humans were still rooted to the ground, rooted to trains and steamboats and engines, and not able to fly. He could have never imagined the fast pace of ideas that would happen today. But there's also an inverse to that. Whereas America has more potential now that its ideas can be more easily dispersed, information has been democratized. America has also more potential for bad ideas to come because bad ideas can use those same lanes of travel. So that's what's happening here. And it's not irreversible. It seems like that because a lot of us look at Twitter or the internet and we say, okay, this seems bad. But we need to, as one of my favorite writers, Roosevelt Lane, said, who also played a role in writing the Little House on the Prairie series, we need to look more at observation, more at Americans, and less at graphs, less at digital interfaces, less at charts. Because when we observe things empirically, we oftentimes get a very different story and a very different sense of the country than we would looking at it through the filter of a digital box.
Right. Yeah. And like when you when you see these Twitter pylons, you gotta keep in mind that this is like what, like sometimes it's like attacks where it's like a
Yes.
couple people,
Yep.
and they just make all these accounts and they attack, and then sometimes it's 20 people who go after Pepsi who are like, you better do something about this. So it does seem like it's a majority of the people, but you're absolutely right. I'm in the Midwest, and most of the people I talk to, most of the people that like, they are not into this kind of censorship. They're not into this kind of this kind of ideas, like, and then of course when you bring in the idea of critical race theory in the schools, there's this huge panic, and like there's a bunch of people who are like, oh no, they're going to teach our kids these things, and in which I don't necessarily disagree that these things should be taught, but I definitely think that we should be examining these. And like, it's just, I know that just being in the proximity that I am, that this is not really the feeling of the whole country. And
Right.
it's really weird. And so I guess, with bringing up critical race theory in the schools and stuff like that, could you kind of like give us a quick overview of what critical race theory is, and then sort of what this panic that's going on with people, on the it's coming from the right, where people are really freaked out, but that their kid's going to go to school, and their little white Johnny's going to go to school and come home and call them bigots and say, I'm a racist piece of crap. How do I make them, like this whole thing, so, it's just this panic going on. And I don't think it's necessarily that, but please give us sort of a breakdown of what critical race theory is, and then sort of how it's being implemented. If you're familiar with that, I think you are. You talk about
Yeah.
this stuff. So please.
Yeah, so I was actually debating Dr. Rashad Ritchie on a network called the Young Turks Network. I'm not sure if you know the Young Turks,
Yes,
but
absolutely.
yeah, he has a show on there. I actually was just debating him about this very topic.
That's awesome.
And Rashad Ritchie is one of the most, I think, articulate defenders of progressive values, including the woke school of thought. And I think that we had a spirited and fruitful conversation about this. Most of his guests actually just get ran over because he's very rhetorically slick. But rhetorically slick doesn't work with me because I'm looking for the truth.
Right.
Anyway, that's a separate question. Yeah, so critical race theory is a sort of academic mechanism that came out of the late 70s, early 80s, developed by a legal theorist who believed that the civil rights movement left out some very important things when it related to the fates and conditions of African Americans in the country. They believe that the civil rights movement actually allowed white supremacy, which they believe is a sort of constant adversary of Black existence in America, to go off the hook by pushing colorblindness. And that also, in their opinion, the colorblind approach also impaired the ability for people to actually fix what they call the racially caused disparity, the racist disparity, which are called by racism in the country, which are still impacting Black folks. So it was basically this sort of legal critique of the civil rights movement in this attempt to develop a mechanism by which to examine and deconstruct American institutions to see the extent of their racism and the extent of their role in oppression and power. So essentially this commentary as well on power and privilege. And so when people say that critical race theory is being taught in schools, they're not saying that Delgado and Crenshaw, two people, two academics who actually helped establish critical race theory and who have been working the theory for decades, are being taught in elementary school or middle school or high school. What they're saying is that the principles of critical race theory are being expressed through certain mechanisms, the most visible of which is the 1619 Project, and the founder of whom, Nicole Hannah-Jones, has gleefully proclaimed that slavery was foundational to America. And the editor of New York Magazine, right before, in the preface of the project, also said that we need to reframe history through a Black narrative to view the history of America as not a history of freedom, but a history of a false bill of goods, of oppression that had been given to Black Americans. That is a critical race theory project without actually saying it's a critical race Theory project.
Okay.
That project was immediately adapted upon its release in classrooms across Chicago, Washington, D.C., New York City, and over 3,500 classrooms in the country. And so, what you see in school boards across America, what you see in the media across America, you see parents saying this is not okay. We see parents saying it is not okay to have this sort of reductive view of America, a ruthless view of our institutions, and to teach these views as fact in our schools. Look, if you want to have a variety of perspectives addressing the very perilous and complex history of slavery and race in America, go for it. The classroom is appropriate for that. But the 1619 Project is not a compendium of diverse intellectual views. The 1619 Project is a deconstructive, radical in the bad way, not in the good way, radical opinion of America that is on one single continuum, one single line of thought that has many different areas. So the 1619 Project is a curriculum. And in that curriculum, there are several essays. Yale professor Matthew Desmond actually wrote an essay critiquing capitalism as antithetical to Black existence. Then there are also other essays where they critique roads and sugar and all kind of other things as all being products of racism. And these essays follow the critical race theory mechanism of critiquing institutions or critiquing the products of institutions to determine the extent of the racism by presuming they have racism involved in them. So it begins with a presumption that they don't back up through any kind of argumentation. They just presuppose it and then move on with their arguments. The problem with presupposing a premise is that you don't know if the premise is true or false. And if the premise is false, the rest of your arguments, the logic are to be observed, falls apart. So yes, critical race theory is being taught in schools in a roundabout way. It's very obvious. The empirical data would say so. And that's not okay. If it was being taught not as fact, but simply as a part of a wide array of approaches, fine. But critical race theory itself does not want to be a part of a wide variety of approaches. Critical race theory prescribes certain certainties about the American life, and therefore it is not suitable to any context in which true, diverse academic inquiry is to take place. So even in the context that would be most fruitful for it to be involved, critical race theory has no place in the classroom at all.
And so do you think that critical race theory in this context of what you just said, the 1619 Project, do you think this is harming America, and why? Do you think, I mean, you're against it obviously, so I'm just curious.
So there are many different ways that critical race theory. Well, okay, what do you mean harming America? What does that mean?
I guess, yeah, you're right. That was a very general question. Do you think that it is harming America in a way that is keeping people kind of confused about what harming America in a way that is, damn, how do I frame this?
Take your time, brother.
Thank you. Is it harmful in a way that people are making it out to be, especially when you hear from like right-wing people? Do you think it is harming people? Do you really think it is turning kids against, kids against parents? Do you think that is actually happening, or do you think that is sort of a panic? Again, like this, I'm using the word panic a lot because if you watch like Fox News or something, and I'm not hating on Fox News, I'm just saying, you would think that this is rotting the core of society right now. So, I mean, do you think that is what it's doing, and do you agree that this is sort of rotting the core, and why is that?
Right. Oh, okay. So look, let me just say something. As someone who is a fledgling political commentator and who works in media every day of his life, all media, progressive and right-wing media, and I work in conservative media, and I happily do so. But all media, progressive and right-wing media, are based on a few metrics. One of them being the metric of outrage or clickbait. I use clickbait for my channel even. So I mean, these are just metrics that are used in media to get views and to get clicks. Now, it is true that sometimes clickbait can be overly exaggerated and can conceal the truth, which is dangerous to actually understanding a subject, because we have to understand the truth of a subject before we can really critique it. However, it is also true that just because a car is beat up and not really presentable, or just because a car seems deceptive, does not mean its contents are deceptive. So I can have a broken down, a Bentley that is mostly just broken down in a lemon. It can look really nice, but am I to be held as deceptive because I'm driving a vehicle which looks nice on the outside, but actually doesn't work? No, I'm driving a vehicle. It may be misleading, but if we look under the hood, we'll know what the truth is and what the truth isn't. And the truth is, critical race theory, perhaps not how it is being said in the public discourse, but in a certain way, is most certainly being taught in schools. And it's not a panic. I think that is actually, it's an acknowledgement of the rot that academia has been pushing and putting into the pipeline, from education to the workforce. And we see that evident in the fact that many corporations now have diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Corporations. Many places in the workforce now have diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Equity being the idea that there are certain groups, again, seeing people as groups, not individuals, certain groups of people who have certain advantages because of the historical condition of folks who look like them, not really taking into account the condition of their own lives. And those groups, by virtue of their historical disadvantages, need to be advantaged over other groups who may have had historical advantages. That's a critical race theory idea. That's a critical race theory idea. So no, it's not really a panic or a moral panic. It really it grinds my gears when I hear a lot of folks say that. It's not really a moral panic.
Okay.
It is a very real phenomenon that is being pushed and has been pushed for a very long time, by the way. It's not new, but it's only being recognized now because President Trump had the guts to sign an executive order to try to get rid of it in federally funded initiatives, which was signed up by Joe Biden when he came into office. In fact, you've seen Joe Biden and his administration trying to push several instances of critical race theory down people's throats, whether it's the education grant they were forced to resign, which said if you're going to teach American civics history, you have to, if you want to get our grant, you have to teach Ibn Max Kendi, you have to teach anti-racism, you have to teach all these authors. Like seriously, they were saying that in the grant.
Wow.
And they were forced to resign that recently because of the public outrage. Whether it's, it's just, this thing is pervasive. Now, is it dominating every aspect of American society? No. Very few issues do. Very few, except wartime. Wartime tends to dominate every aspect of American society. World War II basically captured the American life. A lot of under Roosevelt's plan, a lot of factories and businesses were actually militarized to produce weapons for our war efforts in Europe.
Yeah, right and here in Detroit and Flint, and there was a lot of Rosie the Riveter. Right?
Yeah, and I'm not. I don't really feel very kindly about any of that kind of stuff. Going into people's property and saying, "Hey, you go work for us now." It's kind of immoral. But point aside, I'll critique Roosevelt later. I could spend an entire episode doing that. Point aside, there are very few political issues that dominate and direct the lives of everyday Americans.
Right.
This doesn't do that holistically, but in some ways it does. In some ways it does, because the schools are a pervasive part of our lives. They're a ubiquitous part of the American life. And if schools are under the allure of certain intellectual forces, that can have an impact. Now, is it turning son against daughter and daughter against son? I don't know about that. I've not looked at any data. I've not looked at any observation. You see, I don't like to rationalize. Rationality and reason are great, but I want to see things. I think that empiricism is empiricism. So Immanuel Kant said that all knowledge begins with observation, but not all knowledge arises from an observation. Well, I disagree. I think that if knowledge begins with observation, you can conclude that knowledge also arises from observation as well. I can't, just because I can see something does not mean I can accurately picture that something in 17 different circumstances. So just because I can see a tree outside does not mean that same tree would be able to survive in the desert. It may not be able to survive in the desert. But I understand that how through observing how trees in my area, which is a pretty posh green area, grow, and how trees in Nevada grow. So observation is the focal point of understanding the world. So I want to observe things.
Yeah.
And through observation, I've not been able to discern if folks are turning against mother or mother against son or whatever. Right. I don't know. But I do know that these ideas are radicalizing people against the foundations of the American Republic, and that's a bad thing.
One Cartagena says out of chat was saying basically teaching an opposing view of traditional white history is bad. I think that's a question.
What is that? What is traditional white history? I don't understand what that means.
I'm
there
not
is
sure.
no single racial history. Okay, so let's break this down. Okay, the Pilgrims, the Puritans, and the Quakers, all three predominantly white groups, which played a very big role in the formation of colonial America. All three of those groups were so different. The Puritans had a very fiery understanding of theology that was unforgiving and wanted people to die if they didn't have their opinions. The Pilgrims immigrated from Europe to be able to practice their religion in isolation and solitude, and they made their villages very insular so that other folks didn't come in and practice their religion. The Quakers were a very forgiving, disgusting, sort of intellectual, contemplative, do-gooding kind of faith. All of them were white, but all of them were radically different, and all of their histories are radically different. You cannot append history to a race because race is not a descriptive term. Race is a meaningless term and given power by people who wanted to oppress certain kinds of people. And there have been people who have forgotten that principle and have taken race and how they have oppressed their intellect by believing in it. It's a lie. It's a grievous lie. It's a grievous lie. Races and skin colors have no meaningful difference in terms of who we are and our humanity. So I reject the idea of white history. There is no white history. There is no black history. There is history.
Yeah.
And there are individuals who happen to be a part of that history, but their skin color is immaterial to what happened in that history, in my opinion.
So when you hear things like black on black crime, do you look at that as like, no, it's not black on black crime, it is just crime? Are you under that philosophy as well?
Yeah, I think that it's so. Yeah, so I think it's a little bit different though. I think because typically people who live closer to each other tend to mess with other people who are like look like them.
Right.
That's
proximity.
Just but if we're going to use these racial terms in the first place, then it's probably important to mention that there is a disproportionate amount of black people killing other black people. Now, is it because of their race? No, it's not. So in that sense, I would not essentialize race to be anything of value other than being a mere descriptor of a different kind of action.
Yeah.
Right. There is no sort of descriptive kind of thing about their race which would explain why they're killing each other, unless you're a racist and you believe that certain behaviors that black people have are linked to genetic inferiority.
Right.
This is what the race realist crowd believes. I think they're nonsense. They're liars.
Ridiculous people.
Yeah, they're liars.
Yeah.
So I think that they're just misguided people. So that's putting it lightly. So yeah, I think that sometimes it may be okay to use descriptors to describe something that is proximal to a certain kind of action. But the problem is when descriptors, when aesthetics becomes a moral or an ethical judgment. Let me put this into more simple terms. Please. So when a lot of people say there are racial disparities, they are using the racial part of those disparities to make a judgment about the morality and or the cause of those disparities without considering that the racial part of those disparities may be insignificant to the actual cause of the disparity.
Yeah.
So that's how I handle that.
Well, like you keep on talking about like individualism and stuff like that and stuff like that, but individualism and this sort of utilitarian thing that's coming about, and I am reading
utilitarianism.
Utilitarian. Well, I'm just saying. I'm sorry. I'm building up to a point, and maybe I misused that word. I'm sorry. But I'm reading Robin DiAngelo's book, White Fragility, just because I should know. I should know. Just because I'm interested, I'm gonna read Kendi's book too. Just because I want to know what people are saying, and she sort of lays out this idea that individualism is sort of taken away from this collective, and I don't know if maybe that's what you're kind of referring to, is sort of like you have to sort of toe the line of your race, if you kind of sort of have to toe the line of your party. Maybe I'm mixing these things up and mixing these ideas up, but um, what is your idea of when you say individualism as opposed to what Rap and D'Angelo is when she's trying to take emphasis off of individualism? Where how do you take that? How do you understand that?
So Robin DiAngelo and the entire critical race tradition's problem with individualism is that to them it's an extension of color blindness,
Mm.
right? Seeing people as individuals independent of their color may be all good and well, but we cannot get there in their eyes because color has and still is being used as a mechanism to oppress them. So for Robin DiAngelo, what you're doing is you're actually making it much easier to oppress people if you look at their individualism and not their color.
Mm.
Now, this is bullshit because again, it assumes that all people of a certain color are oppressed. That is not a empirically verifiable claim. It assumes that disparities must be linked to racism, which is also not an empirically verified claim. In fact, there are many different causes and potential causes for disparities, as Thomas Sowell, a great economist, has actually laid out in discrimination and disparities. I mean, it rests on a range of assumptions that are just nonsensical,
I'm sorry, Thomas
and
Sowell.
that
Is that's black redneck, white liberal? Is that
yes, that's one
okay?
of his books.
Okay,
He is a prolific writer. He's
yeah,
written
he's
so many different materials, especially on
very
this
good.
topic. On this topic,
Yeah.
and discrimination and disparities is a very good book for people who are
Okay.
curious about the origins or the various possible origins of racial disparities in data. So yeah, D'Angelo and her crowd just think that individualism is simply a catch-all term, which is an extension of colorblindness, and that's bad. I use the word individualism because I genuinely believe that in our natural conditions, our individualities are the most important things about us. Because from our individualities flows the principle of self-interest and self-preservation. And from self-interest and self-preservation flows the eventual social bonds we get into as human beings with other people, to communicate with them, to love them, to be charitable to them. And from that flows society. So quite literally, the individual is the most basic and fundamental unit of society. But that's not the only reason why they're important, because the individual is also the most basic and fundamental unit of human life. Without the individual, human life is impossible. So for me, when these racially possessed scholars go ahead and they reject individualism, they're rejecting the very condition that makes our humanity possible, and they are therefore moving the premise for all of their arguments to make sense. Without humanity, all this talk of racism and racial disparities becomes just nonsensical because there's no subject to them.
Mm.
So no, individualism is very important, not because it's some contrived thing, but because it actually is a real condition and the best condition, as I mentioned before, to understand human action, human desires from.
Mm. Yeah, I think there is something to individualism, and the way I always explain it is like I feel like when you're like for me, for instance, I lost a bunch of weight, and just by doing this, I had lots of people in my life who saw that transformation and was like, wow, that really inspired me to do something. And so it leads you to believe that you can inspire people by taking yourself seriously, by, Jordan Peterson, clean your room, get your room in
Mhm.
order and stuff. So it's, I definitely can see that, but I do also see the side of of community and of how some people, these different communities can get overlooked when it comes to funding, and I don't know if it's more of a race thing than it is of a class thing or a a class type of thing, but I mean definitely racism is a part of it. There's racism involved in a lot of what's going on. I'm not going to deny that there are racist people out there, but I think a lot has to do with a class system, and people are getting overlooked and left behind. Do you agree with that, or do you think that's way off? And I don't even know what I really. Please, please.
Yeah, I don't. I think your argument's a little vague.
Yeah, of course it is. Because I'm fucking.
I
I'm
don't
a
know what you
musician.
mean. Who's being overlooked? Who's not getting
Well, I'm saying, but
funding?
when you look at these poor neighborhoods like South Chicago, when you look at Baltimore, when you're looking at these
Okay.
neighborhoods that are not getting funding, schools are falling apart, houses are falling apart. It does seem like there is a need to take focus on these neighborhoods to sort of uplift them. And I'm not sure if it's necessarily a race thing. I'm saying
Right.
it's looking more like a class thing to me. And you're shaking your head no. And maybe I just don't make sense, and maybe I'm just talking
No,
out of
no,
my
no, brother.
my ass
You're
here. But
making a good proposition. I heartily disagree. But the thing about intellection is that we can both come to different conclusions and still have a fruitful conversation. If a
yeah,
conversation produces fruit, it produces something that's going to be useful for our apprehension of the idea. The Platonic dialectic between knowledge and opinion. So let me just address this real quick. You mentioned education. Let's go on education. So Baltimore and Chicago, both of those cities have one thing in common. Not that they have a lot of black people. They do.
right.
They have one thing in common. The parents in those cities, it's either impossible for them to choose a school outside of their zip code, or it is very difficult for them to do so. School choice has been shown to be one of the number one drivers of black success in education. Period. There was a study taken out of, I believe, the Oakland Public School District. I think it was Oakland. And it showed that in that area, and Oakland's a black area, and there's poverty in Oakland. In that area, black kids in charter schools exceeded their public school peers in many areas: discipline, education, educational affinity for certain subjects, college readiness. And it also showed that more of them did go ahead and go to college. We know that if you go to college, or at least this is the general status is changing, but if you go seek college, you have a higher chance of making a higher income in your life. Now, of course, you have a higher chance of having more student debt too, which is people folks don't recognize. But generally, if you go to college, you typically are escaping poverty. That's just like a signifier for it. Generally, now this is changing. This is changing, but that's just like the general signifier. But there are superintendents and there are roving bands of school administrators who are doing their very best to keep certain kids trapped in certain zip codes in the name of preserving public education. Well, guess what? I'm going to say it right here. I don't give a damn about public education. I give a damn about someone's ability to be individually successful and fulfilled in their life, and that requires allowing them to make choices. If they cannot make choices, they will have a chance of having a lesser, or actually, I can tell you, if someone cannot make choices, they will not reach their potential in life. They will not be able to pursue their desires in life. The will is the fountain from which everything else in life flows. Everything else that is meaningful in life flows. So, school choice is a very, very powerful tool to allowing those communities, or people in those communities rather, to help themselves. Looking at a situation saying, let's just throw money at it, it's not going to help at all. Especially if there are certain underlying cultural factors that dictate the norms of a certain community, because culture does matter.
Yes, it does.
Lack of fathers in the home is a big issue. I know that a lot of people talk about this, but it's a big issue. It's a big issue in certain areas. That's not to say that people who don't have fathers cannot be successful. For a good majority of my life, for all of my life, I was raised by a single mother. My father was there somewhat, but not a constant force. My mother was the constant force in my life. I think I'm doing quite fine. But because I had the drive, I had the energy. Not everyone has the drive or the energy. Yeah. Not everyone has that model in front of them. So I think that's a big issue. I think what fatherlessness can lead to, which could be gang affiliation, that's a big issue. Those tend to become staples in the community as well, and they promote certain kinds of activities that are not very good. I mean, there are a variety of things that are cultural that absolutely have an impact on how many African American communities do, and those aren't talked about.
Yes,
oftentimes,
and
certain academics talk about them, but most don't.
But and to the point where you're almost not allowed to talk about them. Where it's
Right.
like, if you do talk about them, then you're doing some kind of harm to the race, or you're doing harm to this collective. What do you think about that idea of like not bringing up certain subjects, especially around race? And you even mentioned cultural things within the Black community even. Thomas Sowell, I think I saw him on a YouTube video where he's talking about the culture of like hip hop and the culture of
Oh yeah.
learning has been, people, why are you reading? Like, why are you reading that book? Like, why are you doing this? Like, and I don't want to speak out of term here. I know that I'm not allowed to talk about this because I'm white and stuff.
No,
But
no, to hell with that. No,
well,
no, to hell with that. To hell
hey,
with that. Talk about it. To tell.
well, that's
This is the
why we're
problem,
talking
brother.
about. That's why we're
This is the
talking about.
problem, my brother. This is the problem. This is the problem because there
Right.
are some intellectually pretentious and insular people who cannot conceptualize anyone of any race or skin color having an odd conversation about something that impacts everyone. Talk about it. To hell with that.
Oh yeah, I have been. I actually got in trouble for talking about it a couple weeks
That's
ago.
okay.
Yeah, I
That's good
know.
trouble, man.
But
That's good
it's
trouble.
not good trouble when it's like weighing in on you and you feel like you're horrible and yeah, it's just like
Well, well,
it was
don't
a
let
suggest-
these intellectual tyrants tyrannize you and make you think something about yourself. These are intellectual tyrants who don't have an ounce of honesty in them. They have absolutely no business talking about this issue themselves. Every black person has a fundamentally different experience in this world. There is no one black experience that any one black person has the universal validity to comment on. That is a lie that goes against observation. It's a bullshit. Excuse my language, but it's bullshit.
You're right.
So please,
Well,
I'm sorry. Go on.
no.
It just grinds my gears. That grinds my gears.
Well,
Oh, he's white. He can't talk about it. Of course he can.
well, and I that what happened was is that I was talking to somebody and she was she's not just a rapper. She's actually an incredibly talented human being who I pissed off. But like we're talking about certain racial issues and being told, she was telling is like if you're not black and you're not from the hood, then you have no right to speak on this. And like I see the point. I do. I do see like you don't know my experience, then how do you have any kind of what do you have to add to this if you don't know what my experience is? If you've never walked a day in my shoes. I was saying things like, I'm married to a black woman. I have a black son. I'm half Mexican. I grew up in the hood. Like, like there is all these factors that I have experienced some of, but I do agree that there is a sort of privilege that comes with my skin tone. Just
There
in,
is.
I would say so. I've seen it anecdotally. I've seen it. Of course, this is not something you can quantify, but anecdotally, seeing how people are treated, seeing how darker skinned members of my family are treated in specific
By whom?
situations by bouncers. Getting into a club, it's like you can come in, but not you. It's like and using a bathroom in a Starbucks. I was able to use it. My wife. No, you're not allowed to use it. And I know this is anecdotal, but I've seen enough of this and I've heard other people's experiences enough. I have I have black friends. God, that sounds stupid. But I do talk to people and this is what I talk about because I want to know these things. I know you have a big disagreement with all of this. So I do want to hear
May I
your
ask
opinion.
a question?
Sure, please do. Please do.
Okay, let's say that someone came up to you and let's say that their car is breaking down. Okay, the car is breaking down,
Okay.
and or they claim their car is breaking down because the transmission is just off. Let's say that.
Okay.
And every time their car had a problem, they would say, "Oh, that's transmission, man. It's breaking down eventually."
Yeah.
Every time they had a problem. Now, a prudent individual would go ahead and investigate the causes of their car, the many causes of their car breaking down, which could be numerous. But if someone just presumes their car is breaking down and chalks up every bad instance of their car not performing as well as it could to a single instance, they could be missing the point or the real problem. They could be laboring in ignorance. I think that when our discourse is currently saying that African Americans are mistreated in society every single day by ubiquitous forces that white folks don't experience, we're more apt to interpret every instance of someone being rude to a black person as racism rather than as something else. That's what's going on here. It's called confirmation bias.
Yes.
I think assertions of white privilege are oftentimes confirmation bias.
Hmm.
I don't think they're actually evidence of white privilege.
Okay.
White privilege is simply a term concocted from the halls of the woke academia, who attempt to explain the sort of the social currency of whiteness, or whatever that might mean,
Hmm.
in everyday interactions. Because to them, it seems illogical that a white person could have a hard life when quote unquote white supremacy, in their opinion, is the reason as to why black people, in their opinion, have a hard life. So what do? They universalize all white people's experiences and try to say, you know what, because you have a certain skin color, you must be doing good. It's confirmation bias. And the problem with confirmation bias is that it omits certain other answers which would possibly be the correct answer. It's confirmation bias.
Hmm.
There is no white privilege. There are
Uh,
privileges in life, absolutely.
hmm.
I mean, I am a educated person. I'm not the smartest person in the world, but I'm educated.
Yeah.
I've gone to college. You know, I have the ability to work from home. You know, I have a podcast. I have a channel that has a growing following. I'm pretty privileged,
Yeah.
and I thank God every day, because it's not, none of it's me. It's all God. I'm not sure how you feel about religion, but for me, in my opinion, it's all God.
Yeah.
I'm privileged, but I also realize that there are people, white folks in Appalachia, who don't even have shoes on their feet, who are dealing with meth addiction and opioid addiction, who are getting harassed every day by the police because they're poor, who don't even have working water, who don't even have working air conditioning, who bake every summer because of their lack of material necessities. White folks in a wide area of this country, not a small area, a wide area of this country, who are suffering every day. And I can recognize that they are less privileged than I am. Now, some folks are saying, "Oh, it's missing the point." No. If the point is that white folks have undue advantages in their life because of their skin color, you would expect this to be playing out universally, or in most cases. But there is a wide area of the country where this is not true. And even anecdotally, there's also instances where this was not true.
Hmm.
There was a man somewhere in the Midwest, a white man, who was on his belly, and he had a cop screaming at him. This happened a few years ago. Cops shouting invective at him, saying that if you move, I will kill you, man. His pregnant girlfriend was in the other room, hearing everything. And so he was crawling forward and told him to get up. So in an effort not to embarrass himself, he tried to pull up his jeans so they wouldn't fall down when he got up. When he put his hand back there, all 7 or 8 of those cops put lead in his body. White guy. Police brutality. Here's the point. Confirmation bias is no way to understand the world. It's no way to reckon with this world honestly. And if that's the metric by which we understand things, understand race in America, we'll never get to a satisfactory answer.
Yeah.
So no, white privilege is nonsense. It does not exist. Does not exist at all. Nope.
I think a lot of people, when you're saying that there's this especially a historical bias against black people in this country. I mean, there's no denying that there has
Sure,
been.
racism happened. It happened systemically, absolutely.
And to say that we're living in Jim Crow times is also disingenuous. It's like,
Yes.
to say that. I mean, when people are saying that it's just as bad as 1950s America, I'm just like, well, I'm married to a black woman in 1950s America. Yeah. That would have been illegal.
Loving v. Virginia wasn't even a thing then.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court case which authorized interracial wasn't even a thing then.
But when you look at the history and you look how the media has framed black and brown people over time, and how that this is sort of, I can see, not you, but I can see how people can be, a little fed up with this, especially with negative connotation towards black people.
Me too.
And yeah,
me too.
So I can understand where people see this, because when you look on the TV, all you saw is white people. And when when you saw success, all you saw was white people. When you saw cool commercials,
really?
This is what I'm saying.
The Jeffersons?
A historic, right. But that was
Jeffersons,
of
Family
course,
Matters?
Cosby Show, not Cosby.
Cosby Show?
The Cosby Show. Yes, of course. These were huge shows, but there was a lot of dominant. White was very dominant. And And so I can see how people want to are see how white people were treated differently through media, through way that society has sort of shaped the idea of what black is and what brown is, Mexicans and Latinos and Asians and stuff. But I don't know why I had to do this stuff. That was ridiculous. But it was but I can see how that can come to the conclusion that white people have a little bit of a step up over other people when you're looking at this in a
So
sociological term. And I know that might not be up your
no, I think that we're viewing society as this large, massive organism by which we can measure everything through a single course. That's not true.
Mm,
Society is a very individualized, microly created thing.
mm.
It's not this large organism. So that's one thing. Number two, just because there have been a lot of white folks in entertainment does not mean
No, and that's not
that
just that's not
you
just
know.
that, but there has been obvious things that I can't even bring to mind right now because I'm on the spot and I can't make a great argument about this. But seeing how black people are treated, seeing how black and brown people have been treated historically, and
It was
compared to a
wrong.
white people, you could see, especially with how policies were made, with gerrymandering and all these different policies that were
Let's be
put in.
clear.
Sure, sure.
Gerrymandering is a tool used by both white legislators and black legislators,
Well, redlining. I'm
especially
sorry,
today.
redlining.
Oh, well, okay.
When you look at
Yeah,
these
yeah, no, of
historical
course.
things, that so I can see how people see how white can have a step up, and how that there can be better. I have my anecdotal conclusions, which I understand is not very scientific at all. And I'm not, and I'm not even necessarily disagreeing with you, but I just, like I see where people are coming from when they're saying that white people have a privilege. I don't know if you can quantify it, but yeah, it's kind of ironic pointing out confirmation bias and then using anecdotes as evidence against statistical trends.
What statistical trends
No,
exactly? Are
I'm
you talking
sorry.
about racial
I
disparities?
think we're getting.
Which ones?
I think I dipped into a conversation that I wasn't
I
aware that was
mean,
going on here,
look,
and someone heard. Yeah.
a lot of folks accuse me of just saying things that have, very little merit to them, that I'm idealistic. And I just went on a show with Dr. Rashad Ritchie, one of the most prominent progressives on the internet, on the Youngsters Network, and we had a 23-minute debate about all this stuff.
Mm,
And Dr. Ritchie concluded with the idea that he thought I can represent my ideas well.
mm,
And he's someone who very much believes in white privilege, very much believes in wokeness.
mm.
So I'm willing to talk to anyone,
Yeah,
especially people who have doubts about me. I don't care if they're PhDs. I don't care. I'll talk to them.
I think what people in the chat are kind of lighting up about is that you're using this idea of confirmation bias as evidence that it doesn't work. I do want to read this highlighted message. If a black man and a white man get caught shoplifting, what is the probability of the punishment being the same? Okay, that's a good point. Is when you see
Depends.
how people
If
get.
you're in San Francisco, there's no probability because no
Yeah,
one
you're
gets punished for
good.
shoplifting.
You're good as long as
I
it's
mean,
not
it
over
depends.
1,000. You're good.
And here's the problem with using disparities in punishment as a means of ascertaining the possibility of racism.
Mm,
Punishment oftentimes depends on a few things. Number one, it depends on the policies of the prosecutor in that area, and it depends on how gun-ho the police chief or the sheriff or whatever law enforcement body in that area is about certain things. If you're in Portland or Seattle, particularly if you're in if you're I think this is Seattle. If you're in Seattle, you can go and occupy an entire part of a neighborhood if you claim it's for social justice, and the police chief and the mayor will step down, the prosecutor will step down and not do anything, even though someone got killed and people's property was being hijacked. This is the Chaz zone, the CHOP
yeah.
zone.
Yes.
I mean, so you cannot account for the intentions of law enforcers because they differ from jurisdiction to jurisdiction.
Mm, yeah.
So that's what I have to say about that.
Okay. Papa Sweet, I was specifically talking about the instance of the white man being killed by the police officer. Terrible incident, but there are twice as many black people killed every year in America as white people when related to their population numbers.
By who?
I'm not sure.
Other black folks? Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah, that's true.
yeah.
And that's a problem.
And so do you so and so you don't think that is you don't think that that is a result of white supremacy. You don't think it's a
No,
result of all these, redlining policies and
no.
these underfunded areas that get gerrymandered and things get,
Well,
districts get cut out of funding and stuff. You don't
well,
think that any of that is,
gerrymandering,
well, I know it's a
gerrymandering.
practice that goes on, common, but there has been crappy uses of that in the past.
Sure. So gerrymandering is the product of a political system which prizes power above anything else.
Mm.
So again, the intentions for gerrymandering are numerous. Sometimes they're simply used to redistrict because populations grow. That's a general use of them. But many times they're used to certain like write off certain legislators from being able to be in Congress. I mean, so there are many different uses of gerrymandering. I think that it's wrong to say, okay, if gerrymandering was used this one way in this particular black neighborhood, it must have been used in a racist way. Well, we'll have to see about that. It's kind of hard to quantify that. Again, these are things of confirmation bias. But about underfunded communities and things of that sort, again, I think that the issue of poverty itself is not necessarily part and parcel to the issue of race. There are folks who disagree. I don't think they are part and parcel. Do I think things like redlining and things that had an impact on people? Of course they did. Of course they did. Redlining has been outlawed for 53 years, though, and eventually we have to see. Okay, after redlining, many decades after redlining, is there any other factor that can contribute or that can tell us about the rates of black poverty, the rates of certain kinds of black actions that may not be linked to redlining? A practice which has been outlawed for 53 years is actually constantly investigated by departments of justice. There was a section of the Department of Justice that constantly investigates redlining and pursues claims that mortgage or whatever are redlining people. So, I mean, I just think these are evidences of confirmation bias, not evidences of white supremacy.
Mm-hmm. Reina is asking, I'm curious to know what you learned from the conversation with the progressive you named, or was it simply a debate you were trying to win? Okay.
Thanks
for adding that.
A lot of people in your audience appear to be acting in bad faith for some reason. I have no idea why.
Oh, no. You know what? It's because they don't agree with you, and
that's fine.
Yeah, and
that's totally fine.
I'm not. They got a mind of their own. I can't. Script Queen.
Of course.
Script Queen, welcome in.
It's totally fine. It's fine. Whenever I go before more progressive audiences, this happens, and this totally.
Yeah, fine. I'm sure.
It's totally fine. So I think I learned a lot from Dr. Richard. I learned that he generally believes what he said he believes. I learned that he couldn't really articulate to me the cause of racial disparities. All he could say was that, well, racism could be an answer, couldn't it? I'm like, maybe. Let's look at the particular situation. Then he kind of ran from that. So, I mean, I learned a few things, but I mean, I don't.
Yeah, you have your views.
Just because I learned something does not mean I need to shed my values and agree with that person.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Values and intentions that mean anything are not like Plato.
Underfunded areas implies that governments just give free improvements to one area versus another. Those areas pay for improvements through their property taxes. Okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah, and what do property taxes fund? Public education. So we're getting back to the need for school choice.
Yeah. And so what is your suggestion for public? So you're saying that we should privatize education? Is that what you're saying?
Well, what I'm saying, I think that would be ideal, yes. But what I am saying in the more short term, in a more practical sense, I think that giving parents the ability to go outside of their zip code and send their kids to whatever school they want to send them to, especially charter schools, would be the best thing to do. 100%.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I mean, it's interesting. I know lots of people. My wife has benefited from that as well. Coming up in a poor neighborhood and being able to bus to a nice performing arts school. That was something that people benefit from that. And she's very well educated, very well spoken. She's a business owner. She's amazing, and she's super hot. She has a nice ass. Let me see.
Oh dear. All right.
Yeah, we're taking it there, Christian. We're taking it there.
All right. Not knocking it, man. You go. You do your thing, bro. You do your thing.
Okay. How about sentencing? Right. Black people are far more likely to be convicted and get longer sentences than white people for the same crime. You were addressing that a little bit about, punishment.
Yeah. Okay. This is the issue of sameness. There have been so many academics that have looked at the issue of sameness. And again, it's impossible because there are a lot of mitigating factors around any particular commission of a crime, including what is the prosecutor's philosophy, what is the police officer's philosophy, how was the crime committed. Sameness is statistically meaningless because no one crime is the same exact crime as any other crime. Even if the offense appears similar, there's always distinctions in how the offense was committed, and if that offense itself led to other offenses. So that also is another statistically misleading phrase.
I like that you are more about data than you are about just feelings, like
look, dude.
I'm
a student of philosophy,
right? And it's pretty cut and dry.
When people talk about emotion, the emotional realm is a very important part of the human experience.
Yeah.
And I hate talking about data, actually. Stats, I'm not really good at stats in general. I understand the concepts, but I hate just looking at, I hate sitting there looking at all these numbers. I hate it. But when people make data-related arguments, I get data-related responses.
Yeah. I get that. Not all charter schools are good. Yeah, I imagine.
No, of course not. And not all public schools are horrible too. That's right. There's variations.
Some of the disparities in crime have to do with the circumstances surrounding those crimes. Someone isn't just charged with having drugs, but if they are charged with having drugs and there is a violent act involved, that will enhance the sentencing. And I think a lot of people are thinking of like different cases where it's like a white guy was charged for the same crime, black guy gets a felony, white dude gets a slap on the wrist and is told to have a great day as he leaves the jail.
Is it because he's white though?
That's the idea. There
could be many different causes.
Yeah,
the prosecutor could have been feeling a little bit more generous that day. That white guy could have not had another charge that may have came about through how he committed the crime. I mean, there are many different causes.
And then
racism probably is not a good catch-all cause for things that are multivariable.
Yeah, I agree with that. And then so when you look at the disproportional amount of people locked up in prison system right now at being black and brown people,
they're black. Yes.
So you don't think that has anything to do with sort of a system that was systematically racist and built on a racist foundation?
No, I think that has to do with Richard Nixon's attempt to regulate the morality of individual Americans. And this attempt was actually supported by many black legislators. So, for example, many black Americans are in jail right now, the vast majority for nonviolent drug crimes, which is abysmal, and it needs to change, in my opinion.
But wouldn't you say that is a racist thing? I mean, when you're talking about Nixon, when you're talking about Nixon, like he literally was making these war on drugs. But the war on drugs was specifically...
It was bigger than race, though. It was bigger than race. So black legislators like Chuck Rangel actually took advantage of Nixon's war on drugs, and they used Nixon's drug panels to direct particular initiatives towards their states to penalize the possession of certain kinds of drugs higher than other kinds. So, for example, the disparity between crack and powder cocaine, which is called racist, was actually pushed by a man called Chuck Rangel, Charles Rangel, who is a black New York City congressman who was very concerned about the crack epidemic that was breaking up and destroying black communities. So he decided to go ahead and penalize crack cocaine higher than powder cocaine. This is and many members of the Congressional Black Caucus actually supported that too. So actually what you have seen with the drug war is that many things have happened with good intentions but have had bad effects. And maybe those things wouldn't have happened if we would just simply have the principle of mutual respect, allowing people to make their own decisions and stop penalizing drugs. I think that all drugs should be legal, in my opinion. Drug crimes are the number one reason why black fathers are divorced from the home. It's wrong. It's evil. It's immoral. But is it racist? I'm not so sure.
Well, I mean, it's just that when you, like, wasn't Nixon even, like, quoted as saying, like, this is, like, to go shut down, like, the Black Panthers and stuff? Wasn't that part of the narrative of that?
So black people and the Black Panthers are two different things.
Of course.
The Black Panthers is a militarized subset with a very radical ideology and a very certain view of America. That threatened many traditionalist conservatives at the time. I think, and all of their white allies also threatened them as well. Hippies were not really liked by Nixon as well. Many of them were white.
Yeah.
So I don't think that necessarily was a racial thing per se. It was simply a manner of blind traditionalism.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
it's important to realize.
Okay. Well, it does still feel like it was born in racism. It does
I
still
mean,
feel like
I
it was
can't account for someone's feelings. I mean, I
right.
can't account for someone's feelings. I
I
can't do that.
understand. I understand. And you're trying to keep it. You're trying to keep it quantifiable. Trying to keep it something that you can measure. I get that. I'm like that too. You know, like I want to know what that is. I want to know what
Look,
exactly.
emotions are important. Emotions
Yeah.
are important. And again, I'm a student of philosophy. I get it. Emotions are very, very, very important.
Yeah.
But when someone is making a data related claim, then we have to look at data.
Yeah. I think he's given a little too much to plausible deniability. Like one circumstance, okay, maybe some confounding variables, trends that uphold over decades with a clear possible cause. I think we can safely say probably some racism in there.
No,
When
okay, so a trend that has occurred for decades, that has been linked or measured by race does not necessarily mean that trend is racial. So
Mhm.
the length of a trend does not denote a cause. It denotes a length.
Yeah, okay,
It denotes a length. Then we have to go ahead and find that cause. And there have been plenty of proposed causes for certain things in Black America, like the welfare rate or whatever. There have been poverty rate, plenty. There have been plenty that are not necessarily linked to racist actions.
yeah. Um, did Cathosaurus come in here? Oh yeah, there you are. Hey Cathosaurus, welcome in. Let's see, emotion versus empirical evidence. Yeah, and otherwise numbers just lie. Is that what you said? Wait a second. It's wild how much the leadership shifted stuff, but like to look at data requires a data analysis background. Like, and like that's the thing. Uh, so for instance, when I was talking to that, and I know you got to leave here soon, so we'll wrap this
Yeah,
up.
445.
Okay. You know, I'm not even gonna open that book of worms. Then let's just sort of let's just sort of keep going here. I have actually, because I saw you on. Oh yeah, I remember what I wanted to do. Cartagena doesn't think that you answered his question about only teaching white side of the white history. And I think you did address it where you kind of were saying that what is white history?
There is no white history.
There is no white history. So it's Cartagena, just so you know, that was his answer. Someone, Script Queen, also the Black Panthers themselves changed internally due to shifting. Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, okay, so let me look at this. I just get into, hold on, what? To be clear, I respect your mind. I just get into it for a good debate, like a proper philosopher. Yeah, yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with a proper
Am I
debate.
not a proper philosopher?
No, I think you are. I think he's saying that he respects you. He
Okay.
respects you. He respects your mind. It's traditional history
I
versus
appreciate it.
reality. Yeah, traditional history versus reality. Okay, okay. I respect you, Christian. There you go. There it is.
I appreciate it, but I do. I appreciate it.
And you know, me and Behind That Suit has gotten into things where we don't agree because Behind That Suit is even more liberal than I am. You know, so we'll have these debates back and forth a lot. Some people are assuming that white people and black people from impoverished areas that are hit hard with crime and poverty behave the exact same way. The difference in behavior and that neighborhood culture can account for why a random white person isn't treated the exact same as a black from that circumstance. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. So let me look at my awesome list of questions that I didn't even get a chance to break out because we just went right into it. So let me see. Do you, oh God, this is for 5 minutes. This is a great. Do you think that there is sort of a moral thirst that people are sort of latching onto when you think of like wokeism as sort of replacing this absence of religion? Do you think that people
Hmm.
are? Do you think that that people are sort of gravitating? And this is not my idea, obviously. This has been being talked about, but I'm just interested in your what you think about it. Uh, do you think that the woke movement is sort of the new opiate for the masses, and do you think
Hmm.
that it's do you think that there is a moral hunger that wokeism sort of feeds? And you
Well,
got 5 minutes to answer. Go.
Nietzsche that nut job. He said that
That nut
religion
job.
was the opium. Yeah, he was crazy. He said that religion was an opium for the
Wait,
masses.
I thought that was Marx.
That's his.
Wasn't that
No,
Marx?
okay, that probably was Marx. It was either Nietzsche or Marx. Both of them had very terrible views of religion. Like Nietzsche said that that man and the idea of human agency had to replace God. The entire idea of God is dead. Yeah, Marx probably said it as well. But anyway, both of them had the same sentiments. And okay, here's what I think. I don't think wokeism is pervasive enough to be the quote unquote opium for the masses. There are still many people who don't believe it and don't even know what it is.
Right.
So no, religion has had immense cultural power and force in the formation of American history, or religious principles at least. Although I do not believe America is a Christian nation, I think that we are a nation of values, of secular values, which can be justified on a Judeo-Christian basis, and perhaps are even stronger when they are justified on a Judeo-Christian basis, but they are not necessarily necessitated to be justified on a Judeo-Christian basis. And so, no, I don't think that wokeness is the opiate for the masses. I think that wokeness is simply another ideology, which is certainly gaining steam, certainly making noise, but leaves a lot to be desired, and a lot of people are seeing that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Plus,
Like,
wokeness is more temporal as well. Wokeness is
mm,
dealing with the situations of Black existence for like the past 100, 200 years. Religion has dealt with the very metaphysical considerations of the universe, of human life, of existence for like thousands of years. So
mm.
that's also something as well.
You know, I don't know. Like, have you had blowback from other black folks when you talk
Yes,
like this?
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Is that like? Did you have a hard time in school? I mean, like, I assume
High
that you've
school.
that you.
So
You don't have to get into personal stuff like that, but I'm just trying to understand, where you're coming from and who you are
yeah,
in the
I
in the
get
3 minutes, and that we
I
have
get
left.
called an Uncle Tom all the time.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
get called a ruckus all the time. I get called a tool and a sellout all the time. I get called, and these things are fine, man. Look, when you're speaking, when you are doing your best to speak the truth, you're going to get called things.
Mm,
So I have no problem being called these names because if most folks cannot muster logical and rational arguments against what I'm saying, and if they do, they tend not to insult me very much. And if they do insult me, they're not someone I'm going to discourse with in the first place.
mm,
Yeah, I get called all kind of names.
yeah.
And I actually kind of embrace him. Uncle Tom, I love that. Because Uncle Tom was actually someone who sacrificed himself to make sure that in the story Uncle Tom's Cabin, to make sure that the people who he cared about were all right. He's
Mm,
someone who had physical weakness. James Baldwin, the writer, called him emaciated, but he had spiritual fortitude.
mm,
And if you have spiritual fortitude, you can stand against 1,000 men, because spiritual fortitude is the ability to understand the world, interact with the world in a way that is much stronger than physical strength, because physical strength is waning,
mm.
but spiritual fortitude is a little bit more long lasting.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I actually embrace the term being called Uncle Tom because the thing I have spiritual fortitude. Thank God for that. Thank God for that.
Well, there is a weakness that is flooding the world in physical strength. I'm not trying to fucking call anybody weak or anything, but there is sort of a lack of strength, like physically, that I'm seeing in this country, where, I mean, physically and mentally, it just seems like the country is sort of, I don't know, going crazy, like literally losing its mind, and I don't, man. I don't know how to fix that, and I guess that's not my job. The black community's interpretation of Tom's Cabin is based off the play version, not necessarily from the book. Oh, I didn't know that. Did you know that? I don't.
Maybe I don't.
I don't know.
Apparently, I
Yeah,
didn't know that.
script queen. You know what, Christian? There's no sense of talking anything else. You gotta go, and I really appreciate you coming on the show and talking to me. I know the chat was getting a little spicy there, Reina, and but I appreciate that, and
It's all right.
I had a great time talking to you. I got a lot to think
Likewise.
about, and I wish you the best on your journey. I love that you're a young man who's doing his thing, and I love it. You're an entrepreneur and you got your channel going, and we might not agree on everything, but I think you're a well-spoken person, and you have a lot of good ideas that can be gleaned, even if you are a fucking lefty like me. So I appreciate your time,
Hey,
my
no,
friend.
no. Look, dude. Your political opinions do not, in most cases, political opinions are not descriptive of who you are as a person, your character.
Yeah.
So in most cases, I don't think they are. Now, some people may disagree. Left especially might disagree, but I don't believe they are. So no, I enjoy this. I didn't know I was going to have such a massive pushback from the audience, but
I didn't either.
that's all right.
I didn't either. Honestly, I really did think
That's fine. I mean, a lot of people were saying that I'm living in a dreamland and all this stuff. No, that's fine. Look, every Black intellectual who breaks outside of the progressive mold gets called this stuff.
Yeah.
Even someone like Thomas Sowell, who has gotten degrees from Ivy League universities and has had peer-reviewed articles based on many of the arguments about racial disparity, he's still called names. Yeah. So, I'm in good company. I don't mind. It used to bother me a lot. It doesn't bother me anymore because I'm on as the Blues Brothers said, I'm on a mission from God, and I'm going to not stop until I make sure that it's finished.
God bless, brother. Listen, Cartagena wants to throw in one last thing, and he highlighted it, so I got to read it, and I'm not trying to be, but Christian basically spews the traditional arguments that are a false reality. Yeah.
It's easy to dismiss something without actually engaging with it.
Mm-hmm. Well, Cartagena, I don't necessarily agree with you, Cartagena, and but thank you for using your channel points to do that. Christian, I know you got to go. Thank you so much, man, and I'll be watching your videos for sure, man. I enjoy your videos, and yeah, I'll be in your chat probably one of these days. So have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you shortly. An audio version will be coming out of this as well, so I'll send you all new stuff. So, all right, man.
All right, thank you.
Have a great rest of your day. Yeah.
You have a nice day, dude. Bye.
Later. All right. Credentials don't make a man, IJF. Sorry, I missed most of this live. No, it's all good, Cathosaurus. You would have had a lot to say. You would have had a lot to say. And that's totally fine. I love that. I mean, if the measures is peer-reviewed paper, damn, that opens a huge can of worms. My circle is not as academic. I guess the criminals I know gave me a different perspective. What's up your favorite today? Shouldn't you be on vacation? Cartagena, you better stop that shit. I wanted to get that in. You used your channel points, and I'm not trying to apologize for what you said. I didn't say sorry. Did I say sorry? I hope I didn't say sorry.